Hey guys, welcome back to the School Transportation Nation podcast. I'm Tony Corpin, publisher, president of School Transportation News. We're glad you made it. This episode is brought to you by TransFinder, the leader in school bus routing software, and IC Bus. The next generation can change everything. With me is the always present editorial guru, Mr. Ryan Gray. Welcome, sir.
Hello, Tony. Hello, Nation.
Excellent. Ryan's going to be talking with Patrick Mulick, educational consultant and the director of student engagement for Auburn School District in Washington, and the brand new announced TSD Conference keynote speaker. We have not had Patrick in a few years, and he called us and said, hey, I'd love to speak, and we obliged. Right, Ryan?
Absolutely. So it's been a few years. So it's great to have Patrick back, and he's going to be talking about autism. So we've been doing a lot of behavior discussions at TSD. That's one of the biggest issues folks are having out there in terms of transporting students with special needs. We have a lot of behavior experts talking in November out in Frisco, but Patrick pointed out to us, hey, we haven't really spoken specifically about students with autism. I believe it's like the stats say 1 out of every 26 kids are being diagnosed with being on the autism spectrum. So definitely a very important topic. And actually just saw there was a headline just today as we were recording this. A lot of you saw down in Florida several years ago, really high profile case video showing 6'6", 270-pound student on the autism spectrum who basically body slammed his teacher because of I think the teacher took the electronics away, or a cell phone.
Nintendo, I think it's like Nintendo Switch.
Yeah, it was a Nintendo. That's right. And this boy body slammed the teacher, knocked her unconscious, and just started wailing on her, kicking her, hitting her. Finally, I get it pulled off. He was just sentenced to 5 years in prison. So he's 18 years old now. So there's a lot of controversy about that because he is on the spectrum. So I'm going to talk to Patrick about that and get some more insights from him.
Yeah, behavioral issues definitely top of mind at the TSD conference. It's going to be November 7th through the 12th, guys. Don't forget, you can lock in that super early bird savings for $200 off. It is going to come up quick here on late August to that deadline. So don't hesitate. Reach out, set yourself up with the conference pass, get your staff there. If you guys operate special needs transportation, this is the place to come to get all that great knowledge. And I know Patrick is always a fan favorite. Everybody really enjoys his keynotes. They're always packed, and he's really good, Ryan. I think in previous keynotes, really trying to give people perspective on what life is like with someone who has autism on various degrees. You know, I think his example before, if I recall, was, cover your eyes, one eye open kind of thing, shake your head around, start yelling. And that's what it sounds like every day in their head, right? It was just kind of this very wow, how does someone live like that? And imagine that that's how you living every day, and why you would be agitated potentially, right? So, I mean, there's varying degrees of that, but he definitely provides some examples, because in my life, I don't have anyone in my life that I am with regularly that has special needs. Do I know people? Yes. But it's not a day-to-day thing I deal with where, to live in those people's shoes, those students, those young adults, that's a very interesting way to really get perspective on what they're going through. And how do you, as a transportation professional, train your staff to be able to deal with the unique nature of special needs students? And obviously IEPs and behavioral specialists, OTs, PTs, there's a lot of stakeholders involved in the overall discussion, but it is a growing area, Ryan. We constantly see more and more students get identified and get transportation services as a result. And we've even seen the proliferation of alternative student transportation as well. And we know with type A school buses, there's chassis shortages that have plagued the industry where people are trying to get buses. But now we've seen more and more people look to non-CDL drivers in vans and cars and SUVs. So it's just a really interesting overall trend that the market is looking towards, and it's evolving and changing, because it was blasphemy years ago not to have a yellow school bus transporting a special needs child. And now it seems like very commonplace to have a non-yellow school bus or non-yellow vehicle transporting. What's your take on that, Ryan?
Yeah, well, first of all, I think I said 1 in 26 students. It's actually 1 in 36 students are diagnosed, or children are diagnosed being on the autism spectrum. So I wanted to catch that because I wanted to be true to what Patrick told me. But yeah, you're right. When we're providing service to students who are on the spectrum, or just students in general, because a lot of times when we're talking about these alternative vehicles, it's not simply the students with IEPs. A lot of them also are students protected by the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. And to varying degrees, sometimes the services work out really well for the students involved. I've heard anecdotal stories that some of those students don't want to be in those vehicles because they're ostracized, because they're driving to school in a different vehicle than all their friends, or all their friends are on the school bus. And I've heard the opposite, where the students want to feel more normal going to school, quote unquote, and not going in the school bus. So it's really on a case by case basis. And, certainly this topic is another really big one facing the industry right now. It's reflected in the agenda. We have a general session being planned for Monday, November 11th, right before the trade show, where we're going to be looking at this topic more in depth. Some of you might remember a couple years ago, 2022, our good friend, Dr. Linda Bluth, who is one of our tenured faculty advisors for TSD, she led a similar general session on that trade show day with fellow tenured faculty members Alex Robinson, Lonnie Schmutz-Harden, and Sue Schutrump, where they discussed alternative transportation, and kind of, as a second thought almost to looking at how to provide the best services to students under IDEA, and the topic of alternative transportation came up. And Linda really advocated at that point that something needed to be done in the industry from a best practice standpoint on how do we utilize these vehicles, how do we provide oversight of the companies, because it's that non-traditional mode. The industry is more used to working with the yellow school bus contractors. But we have to remember that makes up only about a third of the industry. Most districts are operating in-house school buses. And we've seen this growth, exponential growth over the last several years, especially exacerbated by COVID and the resulting driver shortage, or worsening driver shortage, is, school districts are looking for other methods, other modes to get kids to and from school, and utilizing some of these alternative transportation services. So these alternative transportation vehicles are not yellow school buses, though, that have this iconic reputation, this safety record that goes back decades and decades, almost a full century. So that's certainly an uphill battle to climb for some of these services, and they can be, very very safe in their own right. They have a place in this industry where we've seen things evolve. But Linda's point was, we need as an industry to provide that governance and take out this wild, wild west element where you have certain companies that are beholden to some rules, that are governed more by the State Department of Education or by the school district safety, whereas these other vehicles are governed by somebody else, like a public utility commission. It's really trying to even the playing field. So she talked a lot about that, and I wrote my column in January of 2023 on this, and really, the upshot was that Linda said, hey, we have the 2025 National Congress on School Transportation coming up. This needs to be a topic. And so she really pushed to get that writing committee included. And there is now one on this non-traditional vehicles that has been developed. But, it took some time, and there was some pushback on it because, the NCST is really, it was founded from the standpoint of looking at the yellow school bus. And that's why the yellow school bus exists, because of the very first meeting in 1939. We know the story. And so it's been getting that sea change to start looking at school transportation, because it is the National Congress on School Transportation. It's not the National Congress on School Bus Transportation. So there are these other modes now that, and it's not simply school districts that are contracting this stuff out. It's school districts that are adding these vehicles to their own fleets. So we're seeing more and more of this, and it's just getting to the point where the industry, according to Linda, needs to take the leadership position. So, hats off to her. She succeeded in getting that NCST writing committee. That work has been ongoing. So certainly in May of 2025, it's coming up quick, Tony. Suddenly, it's what, 9 months away, or give or take. So, it'll be interesting to see what comes of that.
And Ryan, let's talk a little bit about a few of the other keynotes at the TSD conference, right? Joe Mascoro, de-escalation with dignity. Can you talk a little more about what that keynote has? But let's do that right after this quick break. Hey guys, what do software, hardware, and safety have in common? One word: TransFinder. At the STN Expo in Reno, TransFinder won 3 Innovation Choice Awards, voted on by STN Expo attendees for best software, best hardware, best safety technology. TransFinder's Route Finder plus routing solution and apps, Stop Finder and Wayfinder, are well known in the industry. Not everyone realizes TransFinder provides hardware like card readers, tablets, and mounts. And as for safety, Patrol Finder for schools is TransFinder's latest solution, designed to make buses and campuses safer. TransFinder's president and CEO, Antonio Civitella, said the recognition means so much because it's voted on by STN Expo attendees. Civitella said, "We know a lot is riding on TransFinder because a lot is riding on those yellow buses that travel through our communities. TransFinder must continue to innovate as more is being expected of transportation departments from district leadership as well as parents." Learn more at transfinder.com. That's transfinder.com. All right, we're back. So Ryan, let's touch again. So Joe Mascoro keynote. What is she talking about at the TSD conference?
Yeah, well, Joe's back with us. The last time she was out there in TSD was 2018. Before that, she came before we actually took over TSD when we acquired it from Roseanne Schwaderer. So I want to say maybe she came out in the 2000s, early 2000s at some point. But she's going to be back. She's an Austin native, so she's there in Texas, not too far away from Dallas. She is going to do an immersive 4-hour keynote and training where she's really going to workshop it out with the attendees, talking about how transportation needs to address the various behaviors that they're seeing, and kind of bringing the autism angle into it, that spectrum of behaviors, and certainly not simply students with autism, but the different behaviors, that these manifestations that we're seeing on the school bus. So like I said, she's going to be really workshopping it out with the attendees, do a really immersive dive, providing the do's and don'ts, preparing for as well as responding to behavior demonstrations, and really keeping an eye on how to keep the school bus driver, the monitor, the students safe on the bus, while also preserving the dignity of the student, and considering the social and emotional development on that individual in crisis. So that's how we're going to be kicking off the TSD conference on November 8th. That'll be 8 a.m. till about 12:15 p.m., really doing that deep dive. And then, from there, the following day, we mentioned, obviously I'm going to be speaking with Patrick Mulick here in a little bit, but he's going to be talking about unlocking autism from 9 a.m. till 10:30 on November 9th. And then in terms of our legal eagle, Betsy Helfrich is back.
Super popular too, right, Ryan?
Absolutely.
I looked through the room, but there wasn't an empty seat. Everybody is really interested in what Betsy has to say about the legal precedents of things.
We're always adding seats in the back. I mean, we have the hotel staff just on call, bringing in more seats. So we're giving her about an hour and a half to really do a deep dive on her, and she's bringing back her avoiding the bumps and legal hazards when transporting students with special ed, looking at the latest case law, how that is affecting things. Certainly, I think she's going to have some insights on that video I mentioned earlier. Patrick as well, having some insights on getting to the point where we're getting students with autism who are arrested, and certainly, assault is assault. But it's a slippery slope. There's some gray area there. So definitely on November 10th, that's a must-see session. And one that we're going to be having on the website here soon. We have another closing keynote, again, in that behavior window on Tuesday, our last day, November 12th. So we're finalizing the details on that. So stay tuned.
Yeah, I always find the legal discussion so interesting, looking at legal precedents. And obviously last year, we were talking more in depth about some incidents that happened in New Jersey and New York, where there was a student on board that was restrained, or I guess restrained is not a word. They were secured improperly, and it caused a choking incident. And the student died, correct, Ryan, if I'm not mistaken?
Correct. Yeah, there was a couple cases going back many years to the famous in this industry Sue Savage case, where a student died on a school bus in Pennsylvania. The same thing where they were secured improperly, and these different cases are all different in some respects, but what they had in common was these students choked to death, essentially, and there was different disabilities involved, and different scenarios of how they were being restrained. Some were in a wheelchair, some weren't. But the case coming back to proper training, proper securement, and a lot of that also has to do with the monitor on the school bus. So that's a new element that we're bringing to the conference this year. On Friday, November 9th, we're going to be having a training on school bus monitors and best practices. So that has definitely been a hot topic of late. Not too long ago, we talked a great deal about a case down in South Carolina, where a student was horribly abused and beaten by another student with special needs, a student that should have had a monitor based upon what their IEP said, but didn't. So, we saw for a while less use of monitors on school bus because it was a fiscal decision. But as we know with IDEA and IEPs, if that student requires a monitor, they need to have one, and cost cannot be a consideration. And we've seen a lot of school districts adding monitors over the last several years because of these behavior issues. These students need that one-on-one adult to be there to help manage the ride for them, just like they do in the classroom. And too often there's that disconnect between the school bus ride and the classroom still, even with all the talk now about extension of the classroom. Where does the school day start? We're seeing a lot with the cell phone ban conversation right now. That's a separate topic, but where does the school day start? And this industry knows full well that it starts with the school bus ride. And I think a lot of school districts, a lot of local and state governments now understand that, but still not across the board, I feel. And so it's just imperative that these students get the support they need, and our student transportation staff out on the buses get the support they need to deal with these incidences. So looking forward to getting that new training off the ground. Again, that's going to be on November 9th.
Now, Ryan, you also are doing a bunch of hands-on training, evacuation training. I know that was one of the trainings that we had brought forward in the last couple of years, and always sold out, always super popular. Extrication and evacuation. And, as you mentioned, special needs children come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. They could be 200-pound males, or they can be little kids, right? It varies greatly. And trying to move a student that's larger, that can be a challenge. And there's definitely techniques and strategies and equipment to do that. You want to dive a little deeper on kind of what are the modern trends inside that conversation?
Yeah, so we have our evacuation training that's offered on Saturday, November 10th and Sunday, November 11th. You mentioned the word extrication. There is no extrication. You might have been thinking of Paul Hassenmeyer, our fire chief, and
oh yeah, that's right.
and our public safety director from Florida, from Hernando County. He was talking a lot about his school bus extrication book, and he was going through extrication in Reno. Two separate things, but from an evacuation standpoint, this is, I believe, in a year 3 of this, and we've expanded it to 2 days because of the interest. And to really get hands-on, we have to limit the class size. It can only be 32 class participants, so that's why we expanded it to 2 days. Certainly would, I'm sure we have, as our event staff can attest to, we have rather extensive waiting lists to get in. So I would encourage you now to get over to tsdconference.com, register, and select that if you are interested to ensure your spot in one of those classes. But yeah, certainly we are seeing a trend of students getting larger. Just, students are, whether they be obese or whatnot, the traditional securement in a seat is really getting turned on its ear in terms of being able to fit these kids. And so, this evacuation training goes hand in hand with other training that we do. Certainly the NHTSA 8-hour child passenger safety on school buses training, but also too other training that we've been doing with our occupational therapist, physical therapist, transporter forum that we do every year. Sue Trump, our tenured faculty member, really spearheads that. This year we're going to be having that session on November 11th, and really looking at that alternative transportation angle too, of securing kids, whether it be wheelchairs or not, in those vehicles. But in terms of the school buses, certainly there is a lot of conversations around how to get the proper training to be able to secure these students in the proper equipment. And then you have the evacuation standpoint of these kids are getting bigger, and depending upon their disability, are they able to evacuate themselves? Certainly if they are medically fragile or non-ambulatory, you're talking about a wheelchair type scenario, that complicates matters. But as we've been training for decades now at TSD, you don't want to be lifting the wheelchair. That can be really injurious to the staff member. You want to get that kid out in any way possible, because as we know, in a fire or other evacuation, time is of the essence. And this evacuation training and drill, so you get the participants train on the evacuation. We smoke a bus. They can practice it. There's also stations on belt cutting, on fire extinguisher use. but then it all culminates with an actual timed drill. And we know that there's a matter of minutes that student transporters have to get these kids off. So when you're looking at these students that are really large, that complicates matters. Because certainly, especially if they're in a wheelchair, we teach, don't try to lift the wheelchair, lift the kid out and get the kid out in any way possible. Well, if this kid is 2, 3, 4, 5 times bigger than the driver or aid monitor, how does that happen? So these are the types of conversations, these types of trends that folks are talking about, that they're seeing in the field, and exactly the conversations that we're having during our training.
Yeah, I think it becomes this deeper conversation, Ryan, of how can transporters more effectively get their staff up to speed on the latest trends, look at the latest techniques, get the hands-on training that they need. And it's always good to kind of invigorate yourself at these conferences where you're engaging with other transportation professionals that could be dealing with very similar issues, and most likely they are, or they've found a resolution to a challenge that you might be dealing with. So this is about problem solving with your peer group. Everybody goes to conferences. They're looking to connect with other peers, have meaningful conversations about the challenges and look for solutions and kind of find blind spots, right? I think I had talked to a large private fleet contractor after leaving Betsy's discussion, our legal, and he was like, wow, we got some work to do. There's some blind spots we have here that we need to fill and get our team up to speed on these situations that can occur. And, negligence and the inability to provide service could cause death or injury, and that it gives you a lot of liability, a lot of exposure. And I think people intrinsically want to do a good job. They don't want to hurt kids. They want to provide a great service to our children and get them to and from, and do it most effectively and in the most optimal way too. But the fact remains that if you don't know, it doesn't absolve you of liability. And that can really be damaging to any operation, to its morale, financially. There's a lot of ramifications should a fatality occur, God forbid, or an abuse case, or a miscue between administration, the OT. Maybe the child has this behavioral issue, like what we saw where there was a special needs student that was beating another special needs student, and it was horrific. And they got the child home, looked at their body, and it was bruised, damaged, scrape, scratch. I mean, it just breaks your heart hearing those types of stories, Ryan. And where was the disconnect? Where was the failure that occurred? And how do we, as a conference and as an industry, tackle these situations and say, we cannot let it happen again on our watch? We need to do our best to bring these situations forward and say, how can this be improved? How can this situation be avoided? So to me, these conferences provide a really great opportunity to take a deep look at our operations and really help address these situations that are out there and that can happen.
It comes down to training, and that's one of the things that we often do with our OTPT Transporter Forum is talk about the most challenging situations. Everyone has at least one that immediately comes to mind, and our attendees come to TSD, specifically TSD, also our expos as well, but specifically TSD, to try to solve these problems, find out what other people are doing. Are other people seeing similar situations, similar issues? It all comes down to training, and amid all of the pressures on transportation, budget, staffing, and otherwise, that they're being required to provide this service. They all, I think, want to do a good job, but they're under immense pressure from their administrations to do so, as you mentioned, more timely, more efficient, more cost effective. And when those are at play, corners can sometimes be cut. And that's what TSD always strives to do, is saying, hey, we can't cut corners. We have to do the best job possible for the student, not for the transportation department, not for the district budget, for the student. And that is a tough pill for some people to swallow and convince them of that. And sometimes it's even the parents. So, sometimes transportation has to push back and say no based on federal law, based on best practices. And we're going to have a session on that as well. So certainly there's no end to the challenges that student transporters face when transporting students with special needs. So certainly going to have a great agenda for folks to really dive into and sink their teeth into.
Yeah, great info, Ryan. All right, so we are going to get to a conversation with Ryan and Patrick Mulick, fan favorite, keynote expert in autism. But before we do that, we have a quick message. Today's tech tip is brought to you by IC Bus. The next generation can change everything. Looking for ways to improve your on-time performance and reduce operating costs? All IC Bus CE series school buses come standard with factory installed telematics devices, including a 5-year connectivity subscription. Customers gain access to on-command connection, an industry-leading remote diagnostic solution, providing data that is visible and easy to understand and actionable. With OCC, your district will have visibility to vehicle health and performance data at your fingertips, including EV-specific information like state of charge and estimated range. Learn more about standard capabilities of their connected vehicles at icbus.com. That's icbus.com.
All right, let's welcome to the School Transportation Nation podcast stage. School transportation news and TSD Conference and STN Expo, dear friend, Patrick Mulick. Cue the laugh track or the applause, whichever you deem appropriate. Patrick, it's great to see you.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
Absolutely. So it's been a little minute. You are a frequent and, as I always say, much sought after speaker on the speaker circuit for our TSD conference, which we just announced last week. You are keynoting Saturday, November 9th. So we're looking forward to that. We're going to dive into that a little bit. And a lot of you folks out there might know Patrick also from our STN Expo. I think STN Expo Reno was our first foray together many moons ago. I think that was well before COVID. But we're back. TSD, it's been a couple years. And I know that as the certified behavior analyst that you are and director of student engagement, you're still your title at Auburn School District. I know that you are one of the, if not the autism expert there at your school district, but increasingly nationwide. I know you're always traveling, always in demand, especially in people transportation circles. But beyond that, before we get into autism and behaviors, because that's the reason why we have you and so many behavior experts lined up for TSD this year. Over and over again, keep hearing from our attendees, our speakers, that everyone is continuing to have challenges with behavior. Behavior amongst school children continues to increase. I want to share some autism statistics and facts with you, which I'm sure you know very well. These are courtesy of autismspeaks.org. And something you shared with me when we were talking about getting you lined up for TSD this year, 1 in 36 children in the U.S. are diagnosed with autism. That's up from the previous rate of 1 in 44. Amazing. I mean, what have you seen there in Washington at your school district at Auburn in terms of the prevalence and the increase?
Across the board, we're seeing that there's just more and more students showing up every single year in our schools, getting on our buses every single year that are having the autism diagnosis. The diagnosis itself, it is somewhat subjective, and it's a very interesting conversation. If you look at statistics state to state, there's quite a bit of variance. But just overall, when we think about the diagnostic criteria for autism, how it manifests itself in individuals in the many different ways it can, we're seeing more and more of these students enter into public education and needing that higher level of support. And it's interesting because we talk about it being 1 in 36 today. In 1975, it was 1 in 5,000. And we have just seen a dramatic increase over the years. Yes, people know to go get the diagnosis now. There's greater familiarity with it. We also know that we're seeing more cases. And so looking at the numbers increase, you kind of scratch your head, like, at what point is this going to plateau? Or
will it? Yeah.
Will it? Like 100 years from now, are we all just going to have autism? I mean, that's what
maybe we all do already. It's, the spectrum. When people talk about the spectrum, and it's a spectrum. It's this wide horizon, this long, elongated horizon of where folks who are diagnosed, quote unquote, with autism fall. And there's plenty of conversations. Elon Musk, the people talk about him all the time. Oh, he's on the spectrum, the way he handles himself, the way he sometimes stutters or is searching for, and who knows? I mean, we all are people, right? And we're all different. Our brains all are wired differently. We all react differently. But one of the, we know that regardless of the fact, there's just more of them now. And I'm kind of curious, not to get on a political rant or anything, but I'm curious because you mentioned it used to be 1 in 5,000 40 or 50 years ago. I know when I was growing up, I didn't even know what autism was. I don't think I knew anybody, at least that was diagnosed with autism. And you had mentioned that it's just so much more prevalent. It's doctors are screening for it. Child givers are screening for it now, where it never used to happen. So to the point, yes, maybe we've always had the same prevalence out there. It's just that the awareness is so much more amplified. But regardless, we know that the rates are increasing. So in terms of the school bus ride, we're always interested in sharing, what's the differences and the synergies between the classroom and the school bus. Because often, and too often, traditionally or historically, the school bus wasn't viewed as part of that educational process. We know it is, and we're starting to see more of that conversation, especially from the federal government, saying, yes, this is an extension of the classroom. So with what you are doing in Auburn and with what you're training the folks, how do we make sure that transportation makes those linkages for special ed departments and for these therapists that are working with these kids?
Well, first and foremost, what you started with there, the school bus is the extension of the schoolhouse. The school day doesn't start when our students get into the building and the bell rings. It starts when they have to leave the comforts of their own home. And you think about the challenges that students with autism have. One of the biggest struggles they're going to have is transitions. Transitioning from one activity to the next, going from recess to reading, going from a science class to a PE class to going home. Transitions in general, typically individuals on the spectrum will struggle with them. And you think about the biggest struggle that may come in their day, it's going to come from the biggest transition that they experience. And there's no bigger transition that you have leaving the comforts of your own home and arriving at the schoolhouse or going the other way. So automatically, just in the way autism works, there's many challenges that it presents on the school bus. But then on top of that, you put in the environmental factors. You have many individuals in a tight space, the sensory experience, the noise, the smells, the unpredictability that can come with riding in a bus. You might have a substitute rider. You might have a day in which you have the bus is changed for a different bus because that one bus is being maintained. And has to be worked on. So the bus number changes, but everything else is the same. And just having that small shift can send someone sideways. So there's a lot of challenges that can be presented with riding the school bus. But when we get the work right and we set the tone for a student's day the right way, getting them there safely in the morning in a predictable and supportive manner, it sets the tone for their day. But getting that right, we have to pay attention to many small things and rely not just on those who work in transportation. I feel that one of the barriers that still exists, and this is across the country, is that we don't have enough effective communication between the schoolhouse and transportation. And when we talk about what transportation staff need to properly support this population, yes, there's strategies that you should know, right? And I do a lot of that. I travel around the country and I equip transportation staff with general strategies of how to best support students with autism. But many of the conversations, when we really want to get to being effective, it requires us having shared individual collaboration, individual plans around what to do for the particular student or students that's sitting in front of you. And so when we think about effectively transporting students with disabilities, we need to know what are we doing to equip our staff, right, our transportation staff with how to best support that population, but then also what are the systemic pieces we need to have in place so there is collaboration and communication amongst the professionals, both in transportation and in the schoolhouse.
And, one of those challenges, because you're talking about staff, the driver shortage, which something that's, as long as I've been in the industry, has been an impact negatively. And we've seen it obviously across the board worsen coming out of COVID.
Yep.
I think in certain places, at least, the tide is turning a bit, or at least, it's not worsening. But I want to ask you a couple questions about drivers. Okay. And you mentioned, and what I was really hearing from you was that consistency.
Yeah.
Students with autism, all kids need consistency. They need that structure, but it's just amplified, right, when you're talking about children on the spectrum.
Yeah. I mean, surprises are scary for individuals with autism, and having that predictability, having that structure. When we think about creating a welcoming and supportive environment for students, you think about greeting them when they get on the bus and wishing them a good day when they're getting off the bus and making sure that everyone's following the rules. That can provide comforts for all kids. But when you think about students with autism, there's much more smaller pieces that can come up that are surprises that are on the bus. It could be something as small as someone passing them and accidentally bumping them with their backpack as they come by. And that surprise was not expected. And because of that, that triggers something. So creating a safe and supportive environment by the bus drivers, and if we have an aide on the bus, that's going to be an essential part to effectively transporting them. When we have situations that come up, you're talking about the driver shortage. So sometimes we have a rotation of drivers on the bus. That can be very disorienting for the individual with autism, because they don't have that relationship. They don't have that connection. They don't recognize the face or the voice. And that individual driver, that person who may be rotating on that day to help take that route, may not know the small ins and outs of how to best support, how to make sure they're sitting in the right seat, that it's not too loud, that it's not too cold, that they're being reassured that it's only 3 more stops until they get to the destination. All of those pieces can be missed when we have a rotation of drivers coming through, which adds to the stress for the student with autism.
I'm glad you mentioned monitors or aides, because certainly that plays a huge role. TSD, in fact, we have a special training that we're introducing this fall on best practices for training school bus monitors and aides. That's going to be Friday, November 8th. So the afternoon before you take the stage. So that's going to be a 3-hour training session opposite our foundations of special needs. So that's new this year, because something else we've been tracking is the need for monitors on buses. It used to be more prevalent if you go back 30, 40, 50 years ago, maybe when we weren't seeing the prevalence of, for example, autism, like you just mentioned. But economics have factored in. We know transportation, traditionally, their budget hierarchy is lower on the totem pole at the school district. We've seen, over the last couple of decades, a lot of school districts going away from monitors, but we know that the IDEA, the IEPs should drive that decision. They don't always get it right, though. We've seen some pretty high profile cases of kids that should have had aides, and whether they were on the spectrum or not, there was some kind of behavioral issue going on with them where they acted out, they were beating other kids, whatnot, and then the school district found themselves in hot water. Certainly that monitor training, right, is just as important, if not maybe sometimes more important than the driver, and identifying those kids and having transportation be able to influence some of those IEP team meetings. Or maybe they're, again, one of the things we see oftentimes is some of those meetings aren't necessarily thinking of transportation, are they?
There's so many different things to consider at an IEP meeting. And I say this often to transportation staff. I don't think anyone's purposely forgetting transportation. I don't think anyone's purposely saying, well, good luck, with this challenging situation. I just think there's times that come up when school districts or IEP teams, they just don't think of it as the top priority out of all the things that they have to look at. And when you don't allow that part of the conversation into the IEP meeting, you can miss out on a really important part of the process. Again, it is the opening and closing ceremonies for a student's day, and making sure that we get that work right is going to set the tone for the student's learning. Mm-hmm. When I think about the role of the monitors in cases where they are assigned, I mean, they're going to be the ones who are providing much of the one-to-one attention, or the more individualized attention for that student from the moment that they're getting out of their house or out of their apartment, they're walking up to the bus, they're greeting the student, making sure they have everything that they need, they're getting them buckled in, any supports they need while the ride is happening, and then getting them on their way. It's going to be important for us to identify what is it that the monitor needs in order to be successful. What is the information they need to have individually about the student? And then we need to ask ourselves, I think this is a question probably in the entire IEP process itself, the question teams never ask enough: what training do people within the schoolhouse, they're going to be supporting the individual, what training do they need? And that actually is a part of the IEP, right? Where we ask the question, what does the teacher need? What does the paraprofessional need? What does the gen ed teacher need? And we can ask that question. If there's specific training that our transportation staff needs in order to successfully transport a student with autism, we should be answering that question.
Absolutely. And I want to get your thoughts on some of these alternative vehicles that we're seeing really take foot in the industry. We have a session, and we've had sessions on this topic at TSD, a general session being planned for Monday, November 11th, before the trade show. That's really going to dive into this. But I'm curious, when we're talking about the consistency, one of the things that I hear from many of the folks who use these services, and they're increasing, right? And a lot of districts are actually, if they're not contracting these out to these non-school bus companies, they're actually adding more vans and SUVs into their fleets to help transport students with disabilities, as well as students, protected by the McKinney-Vento Homeless Assistance Act. But on the special needs side, or the students with disabilities side, what kind of oversight, or to try to make sure that the same drivers, again, from a consistency standpoint, or are there monitors? And it comes back to the IEP team, right? Because one of the things I hear from folks that are using these services is that even, more so than with the school bus driver shortage, that a lot of times these are different drivers every day. So it really speaks to the consistency standpoint. Student transportation is just evolving. Not every kid can be on the school bus. So then, I want to get your perspective on that, and maybe some things training wise or oversight wise that you are either seeing a need for, or you're actually training folks to look out for.
I mean, so when it comes to the evolution of transportation, at the end of the day, I think the biggest question is, can we still do this well, right? If we have smaller vehicles, if we have different companies we're working with to transport students, at the end of the day, the way we're functioning, can we still do it well? Can we still support that student in a way that's predictable and comfortable for them? And if we have rotating drivers, are we able to share plans out in advance to be able to equip that driver on that day to know some of the basic strategies to support that student, I would see it would be very difficult to replicate a relationship that's been in place for an entire school year or many school years, to be able to replicate that onto a piece of paper. Some of the pieces that come along with our students with autism, you just have to know from experience, over time, of how to best support a student with autism. Sometimes we learn from our mistakes. And if we're having a dynamic where we're having new drivers almost on a daily basis, that opportunity from learning from experience from that one student, that's missed. They say if you know one child with autism, you know one child with autism. Just because you've transported different children with autism before doesn't mean you know the next one, right? The characteristics that they exhibit are going to manifest themselves in different ways, student to student. So I worry about the effectiveness of that. I still think it's important to talk about some of the individual strategies and to be familiar why a student might get triggered, or what are some of the things we can do to help comfort our students with autism as we help them through the more difficult part of their day. If there's at least some predictability of at least sharing with the writer, with our student with autism, that, hey, here's one of 5 possibilities of who you might have today, right? If they can at least know in advance a little bit of what to expect instead of it being a complete stranger, I think we're going to find greater comfort. I also worry about really remote areas or places where students are getting sent to a school that's outside of their district, where students are just being asked to be in a vehicle for a long period of time. Our students with autism can tolerate a lot, but only for so long. And when they're on the long ride, they may eventually break down because their skill set of being able to tolerate some of those stressors over a long period of time just diminish.
Absolutely. And I'm wondering too, if there could be some cases where, because you were talking about with all the sights and smells and everything going on the school bus, maybe some of those kids, again, individualized, got to look at that child by child. Maybe some of this one child on the autism spectrum, maybe they're going to excel more in that private vehicle because that's what they're used to with mom and dad. Or again, I think it comes down to knowing the kids, being, as much a part of that IEP process as possible. We always often hear that transportation can't be at all the IEP meetings, but just trying to really influence that and stay in touch and share that information. Before I let you go, I want to have a little fun here because it dawned on me that I don't believe we've shared or you shared your story of how you got involved with working with children with autism in the first place. So I think that's always great for some of you out there in the nation who don't know Patrick and you're planning to go to TSD. I think this will be a good edification for you. And maybe there's even some folks out there who've seen you a number of times and they love and adore you. You're the masses who you're all your fan mail that you get and the boxes of candy. But they don't know the backstory of Patrick.
Okay. Yeah. Let me see if I could sum this up. And I think I just have to start it off with the saying, our fingerprints don't fade from the lives that we touch, right? We leave our mark on kids and we may not always recognize it, but people leave their marks on us. And sometimes other kids leave their influence and their impact on us. So it started for me back when I was a kid. I was the youngest of 4 boys. And at the age of 13, we ended up adopting my cousin, and she became my little sister. She's 10 years younger than me. I was 13, she was 3. And for the first time in my life, I had that experience of being able to be a positive impact on someone who was younger. I got to be a big brother, right? And I took that with me going into high school, and I took some teacher prep type of classes if you're thinking about wanting to be a teacher. And I ultimately ended up at the Gonzaga University thinking, you know what? I think I either want to do communications or I want to do education. And I took a communications class and I said, this is the most vague thing in the world. I don't know what people in communications do.
Neither do I.
Right. Gosh, I don't know. But being a teacher, you go to school for 4 years, and then when you're done, you get to teach. So I was like, that's the route I'm going. And at Gonzaga, they have a phenomenal special education program. I took one class as just a part of my requirement to become a teacher, and I was in. I fell in love with the population that was not given a fair lot in life. So much to the degree I stayed around for an extra year at Gonzaga to get my master's and become the behavior specialist that I am today. I started in the classroom teaching preschool. I loved preschool. I thought I was going to teach preschool my whole life. The 3 to 5 year olds, I absolutely loved it. I taught in a preschool classroom and then in a middle school classroom before making my way over to Auburn back in 2005. And I showed up here thinking I was going to interview for a preschool job. And they say, oh, no, we have this high school classroom we want you to teach. Right. So, I'm like in my mid 20s and healthy and in shape and all that. And so they must have seen me as, someone who can better support the individuals that they have. And they gave me a group that really helped me grow and really a group that helped me understand that you never know what you're going to love until you try it. And I stepped outside of my bubble and fell in love with that group too. And the more I got into the field and working in education, the different populations I was exposed to, I realized I just love it all, right? It's like at the buffet there in Reno at STN, like it's all good.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up doing that. And then eventually in my role here, I ended up having the opportunity to do some professional development in the district for transportation staff. And then someone from Tacoma heard about that and said, hey, can you come here? And someone from the state WAPT conference heard about that. So can you go here? And eventually one day, Ryan, I emailed you. It was many moons ago. And I said, hey, I've been talking here around in my state around behavior and autism. Let me know if you would be interested in having this at some point. And then I ended up in Louisville. I think that was my first time with you guys.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that was TSD way back in the day. So so here I am today on your podcast.
Awesome. For the third time, no less. So, it's great to see you and talk to you and great to reconnect with you. Looking forward to having you in Frisco here in just under 3 months. It's hard to believe. Here we are, school's starting or started. We're back. We're still hanging on to summer, not ready to give up my white pants yet. It's not Labor Day, but so I have a couple weeks left, but looking forward definitely as the frost hits the pumpkin, as one of my good friends in college from Vermont used to like to talk about. We'll be getting ready for TSD and for welcoming all our great speakers, including you, sir, Mr. Patrick Mulick. Thank you so much again for coming on and sharing some knowledge.
All right. Thanks for having me.
A special thanks to Patrick and Ryan for joining me on today's episode of the podcast. Really great conversation. Special thanks to our sponsors too, TransFinder and IC Bus. Make sure you tell them you heard about the School Transportation Nation podcast, that they were the sponsor, and you love the episode. You love them. Make sure and talk to them. See what they can do for you to solve your challenges and get you the products and services you need. Guys, don't forget, visit stnonline.com for all the latest news and analysis on the school transportation industry and that TSD conference. Make sure you lock in the super early bird discount. Save $200. The deadline is coming up really, really soon. You guys don't forget, make sure you hit it. It is August 23rd. So do not wait any longer. Lock in that $200 savings before the rates go up. And Nation, this podcast is always a pleasure to do. We're so happy to be here for you. Talk about the latest trends, everything happening in the school transportation universe. You guys need anything, make sure and email us, info@stnonline.com. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear about the topics that you want to hear about, that you want us to talk about. We'll dive deep. The editorial team is always keeping their fingers on the pulse of all the things happening with news and analysis in the industry. So we want to keep you abreast of all the latest and greatest, Nation. All right, guys, we look forward to having you next week on The Nation. Don't forget Apple Podcast, Spotify, wherever you listen to pods. We'd love to have you as a listener every week. Nation, we love you. We'll see you next week.